Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Rosh Hashana Daf Gimel begins in the Gemara's final steps to prove, in its attempt to prove, that the Rosh Hashana, the beginning of the year for king years, is the first of the month of Nisan. The Gemara has already made the proof, it just needs to wrap up the names of the kings that are involved. The Gemara will restate the entire proof later in the daf where it's quoted from a Brisa. Up to now it's been Rav Yochanan. The Gemara will also question this proof by asking maybe it could be a different month, that we've narrowed the month that it could be, but there are still other months that it could be. The Gemara will bring another source, which will also be reflected in the Brisa, and then the Gemara will differentiate between kings of Yisrael and kings of the Ummos HaOlam. The Gemara will say that for Yisrael it's the month of Nisan, first of Nisan is Rosh Hashana, for the Ummos HaOlam it is the month of Tishrei. The Gemara will ask from the king Artaxerxes, the Persian king, who was the king of the nations of the world, but seemed to have his king years listed differently than other kings of the world, more like Jewish kings. The Gemara will say perhaps he was different. Gemara will bring a contradiction in the Psukim as to when Artaxerxes' king years began, and the Gemara will resolve the contradiction. So let's begin by looking at the Brisa, which will be quoted near the end of the first half of the Daf, which is a review of Rav Yochanan's source for the halacha that the first day of the year, as far as king years, is the first of the month of Nisan. First, let's just recall what king years are. King year is the year in which you begin each of the years that a king rules. It does not matter what day he becomes king, it matters what the Rosh Hashana for king years are. So, if we say that the Rosh Hashana for king years is the first of Nisan, which is what the Mishnah says, and even if a king becomes king, he's coronated a day earlier, that one day would be his first year, and then Rosh Hashana, which is first the month of Nisan, would begin his second year. This is important because we need to record contracts, we need to have the date, and they are recorded according to the years of the king that is serving. So the Gemara wants to know, what is the source of this halacha that Nisan, first of Nisan, is Rosh Hashana for king years? The Gemara has given a complex proof, and the Brisa says that it comes from a pasuk discussing the kingship of Shlomo HaMelech, and it refers to his fourth year as well as 480 years from the exodus from Mitzrayim, and it counts them both in a similar fashion, which shows that they both begin in the same day of the year. They both have the same Rosh Hashana. The Gemara therefore says that Rosh Hashana for Yetzias Mitzrayim must be the month of Nisan, and therefore Rosh Hashana of king years is also the month of Nisan. How do you know that Rosh Hashana of Yetzias Mitzrayim is the month of Nisan? So the Gemara says it cannot possibly be the other logical option, which would be the first of the month of Tishrei, because we have a pasuk in the end of Chumash Bamidbar that discusses the death of Aaron, and it says that occurred in the month of Av, in the 5th month of the year, and then Moshe began speaking to Klal Yisrael afterwards, and that was in the 11th month of the year, and it says that they were both in the same year, they're both in the 40th year. Obviously, they did not cross a Rosh Hashana for the years leaving Mitzrayim between the 5th month, between the month of Av and the month of Shvat, so it could not be the month of Tishrei. If it's not the month of Tishrei, it has to be the month of Nisan. Says the Gemara, how do you know that Moshe spoke to the Jewish people, began speaking in the beginning of Chumash Devarim after the passing of Aaron? Maybe it was before. The Gemara says it can't be. It has to be after, because it clearly says when he began speaking was after the war with Sichon. And Sichon only attacked when he saw that Aaron had passed away. Where do you see that? Because the Torah says that the king of Arad attacked when he saw that Aaron had passed away and the clouds of glory that Anan had covered were lifted. As the pasuk says in describing Anan, the attack, it says Vayiru Kol Ha'eda, and the entire nation feared. The Gemara says you read that as Vayira'u, they were all exposed. It's because they were exposed, because the clouds lifted, that's why the king of Arad attacked. Now it explains that the king of Arad is actually Sichon. Sichon, he was called Sichon, he was called Arad, and he was called Canaan. The Gemara says he has all three names. What was his real name? The Gemara says it was either Sichon or Arad. It was called Canaan because that was the country, that was the descendants of the people that he ruled over, who were the Amori. They were Canaanites. They were descended from Canaan. If Sichon was his real name, then he was called Arad because it refers to Arod, which is a wild donkey that's very strong to show his strength. And if his real name was Arad, then he was called Sichon because he was like a siach, like a horse, a horse that lives in the desert, a foal of a horse that lives in the desert, and that's because his strength in war comes from his speed. Either way, this is our source for the order of things, and that's how we know that Tishrei could not have been the Rosh Hashanah of years counted from leaving Mitzrayim, and king years are counted the same way, as we know from the pasuk about Shlomo HaMelech. So now the Gemara has a couple of questions here. The Gemara says, first of all, just because you know it's not Tishrei doesn't mean it can't be anything else. You know it's not Tishrei. Actually, you know it's not any time between the month of Av and the month of Shvat, because had it been any time, you could not have called both of those the 40th year. It would have to go from 40 to 41 somewhere along the way there. So it can't be any time between Av and Shvat. But it could be, let's say, if it can't be Nisan, it could be Iyar. So maybe it's Iyar. So Gemara says, no, it can't be Iyar because we see that years don't change between Nisan and Iyar as well. How do you see that? If you look at the construction of the Mishkan was completed on the first of the month of Nisan, and the cloud descended on the 20th of the month of Iyar. Both of those, it says, happened in the second year of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Obviously, Rosh Chodesh Iyar did not change the year because they couldn't both be in the second year. So Gemara says, okay, maybe it was in the month of Sivan. So Gemara says, no, can't be in the month of Sivan because Klal Yisrael arrived at Har Sinai, it says, in the third month of the year of leaving Yetzias Mitzrayim. The third month is the month of Sivan. If Rosh Chodesh Sivan begins a new year, it would have had to say that it was the second year from Yetzias Mitzrayim. It could not have said that it was the third month from Yetzias Mitzrayim. So Gemara says, okay, it's not Iyar, it's not Sivan, but how do you know it's not Tammuz of how do you know it's not Tammuz of or Adar? You've ruled out all the other months. How do you know it's not those months? So Gemara says you're right, and therefore we have to give a new source. And this new source comes from other psukim. The Gemara brings them now in the name of Rav Elazar, and we'll see it later in the Brisa as well. The same Brisa that brings all of Rav Yochanan's that we've reviewed also brings this one as well. And this discusses the construction of the Beis Hamikdash, and it says as follows. It says that they began to build the Beis Hamikdash in the 4th year of Shlomo HaMelech's reign, in the second month, on the second. So the second. It says the second and on the second. What does that mean on the second? So when it says the second means not only the second month of the year. When it says the second month, it means the month of Ziv, which is the month of Iyar. It means not only the month of Ziv, not only the second month, but also the second month of his king year, of his counting of king years. So again, not only the second month, which again just identifies the name of the month, but also the second month of his rulership, which means you have to start calculating the king years the same time you calculate the number of months, the name of the months, and therefore his king year has to begin in the beginning of the month of Nisan. Now it shows that all king years begin in the month of Nisan. So the Gemara asks, how do you know that when it says the second, it says the second month on the second, how do you know that means the second month, not only the name of the month is the second month, but also it's the second month in his king year? Maybe it just means the second day of the month. It's saying the second month, second day, 4th year. Versus it can't be referring to the day, because if it said the day, it would spell it out. It would say the second day of the month. Every other time the Torah gives a date, it spells out the month clearly. So it's okay, maybe it's not talking about the day of the month, maybe it's talking about the day of the week. Maybe it's just trying to tell you that it was a Monday. Versus that can't be, because it was, first of all, the Torah never tells you the day of the week. It never tells you anything which day of the week it happens. Second of all, we know from the fact that it uses the word basheni twice that they both have to be referring to months. The second month, it can't be referring to weeks. And therefore, we got to go back to our Pshat, and this is a conclusive proof that the second month is also the second month of the year, which the second month of the king year, which means that the king year begins Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Okay, the Gemara accepts that, and now the Gemara moves on to its next topic, which is there a difference between Jewish kings and non-Jewish kings as far as how we count the year? So the Gemara begins and says, yes, there is. Jewish kings are counted; their years begin in the month of Nisan. Non-Jewish kings, kings of the nations, their years begin, and they are counted on Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, which is what we call Rosh Hashana for most things. Okay, the Gemara says, how do you see that? So the Gemara presents its proof from a pasuk in Nehemiah, which is referring to King Artaxerxes. Now the Gemara will say later that Artaxerxes had three names. Artaxerxes was a Persian king, also known as Koresh, and also known as Daryavesh. This would be Daryavesh the second. It was also Koresh the second. The Gemara says he had all three names. The Gemara explains at the end that he was called Koresh because he was kosher. He was a kosher king. He was a good king to the Jews. Artaxerxes, as a Persian name, was the name of his rulership, and his actual name was Daryavesh. This is potentially Daryavesh, the son of Esther. Okay, now what's the pasuk in Nehemiah which shows us that his king years are the same? That his king years begin in the month of Tishrei as opposed to in the month of Nisan. So when it says because a pasuk in Nehemiah says Divrei Nehemiah ben Chachaliah v'hi b'chodesh Kislev shnas esrim, and then it also says b'chodesh Nisan shnas esrim l'Artaxerxes. So it refers to the month of Kislev as being in his 20th year, and then afterwards it talks about the month of Nisan as being in his 20th year. Obviously, the year did not change when Rosh Chodesh Nisan rolled around. So Rosh Chodesh Nisan is not the beginning of the king years for Artaxerxes. It's got to therefore be Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, what we call Rosh Hashana. So now the Gemara says, how do you know that both years are counting Artaxerxes years? In the second pasuk it says, Vayhi b'chodesh Nisan shnas esrim la'Artaxerxes, the 20th year of Artaxerxes. But the first one just says 20th year. Maybe it's counting 20th year from something else. Where it says no, when if it says 20th year here and it says 20th year there, it's Gzeira Shava. And it's got to be referring to the same thing. Also, the fact that it says shnas, anytime it says shnas is Gzeira Shava, and it's referring to the same thing. So this one says, okay, this is nice, but how do you know that the incident that happened in Kislev actually occurred before the incident that happened in Nisan? Although that's the order of the psukim, maybe it actually happened out of order. Maybe Nisan happened before Kislev, and therefore Rosh Hashanah for the king year was regular Rosh Hashanah, the first of the month of Tishrei. So the Gemara now says, no, if you read the psukim, that's clearly not what's going on. And the Gemara quotes a lengthy quote of the psukim. This is the beginning of Sefer Nehemiah. And the Gemara reads it off as follows. What happened was that Nehemiah had received a report as to what was happening in Yerushalayim, and that was what happened in the month of Kislev. And then in Nisan, he took that to the king and requested permission to go and help rebuild Yerushalayim. The Gemara quotes it as follows. The Gemara says, Divrei Nehemiah ben Chachaliah, these are the words of Nehemiah, the son of Chachaliah, b'chodesh Kislev shnas esrim, it was in the month of Kislev in the 20th year. And Yisi b'Shushan Abira, I was in the capital city of Shushan, v'yaveh Hanani, echad me'achai. Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Yerushalayim, v'anashim Yehuda, with other people from Judah, v'ashalem al ha-Yehuda, v'ha'pleita shenisharu min hashevi al Yerushalayim. I asked him, what's the situation with Yehuda and Yerushalayim and the other survivors there, v'yomer li, and they told me, nishra mashnishra min hashevi sham in Medina, those that are surviving there in the country, Bera Gadol, they are in a terrible state, Becharpa, they're in a lot of embarrassment, a lot of insult, Chamas Yerushalayim B'Foretzes, the wall of Yerushalayim is breached, V'Sharani Teitz B'Eish, and its gates are burnt in fire. This is everything that they told him. And then later, a few psukim later, it's actually the beginning of the next paragraph after Nehemiah is mispal, he prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he goes and he presents his case to Artaxerxes. And it says, Vayhi b'chodesh Nisan, and then it occurred in the month of Nisan, Shnas Esrim Artaxerxes, 20th year of the rule of Artaxerxes, the king, and he was drinking wine, and I lifted the wine and I gave it to the king. Nehemiah was Artaxerxes' wine pourer. Well, and I generally was not sad in front of him. How can you look sad today? You're not sick. You must be upset in your heart. It says Nehemiah was very afraid, but nevertheless, I said to the king, the king should live forever. How could I not be sad when the city, the graves of my father, in Yerushalayim, is destroyed and its gates are burned in fire. The king said to me, what are you asking? And I prayed to Hashem, and I said, to the king, if it's good for the king, and if I am good before him, Yehuda send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, and I rebuild it. The king said to me, the queen was sitting near him, and how long do you need to go for? How long will you come, and when will you come back? And I was considered good in front of the king. He sent me, and I gave him a time when I was going to return. So there you have it. That's the order. This shows clearly that Artaxerxes' king years were calculated as beginning on Rosh Hashana, the first of Tishrei, and that is a source that non-Jewish kings had their years calculated from the first of Tishrei, not from the first of Nisan. I think there was a question on it because we have a proof that the years of Dariyavish, who as we shall see soon is also Artaxerxes, they were calculated from the month of Nisan, not from the month of Tishrei. Now, that's going to be a problem with this. So what's that proof? So Rav Yosef brings the two proofs from Psukim and Chagai. Chagai is discussing when he went and he asked Dariyavish for permission to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, and he says that the first event was on the 6th month, on the 24th of the month in the second year, and then right afterwards it says on the 7th month in the 21st of the month, and it doesn't give the year. It means we're going from the 6th month, which is Elul, to the 7th month without changing years. Obviously, therefore, the first of the 7th month, which is Tishrei, cannot have been Rosh Hashanah, cannot be a changing year. So that's a kasha on this. How could you say that king years change on the first of the month of Tishrei? So the Gemara answers by saying this is talking about the Melech Koresh, the king of Koresh. He was a kosher king, and therefore his king years were calculated like Jewish kings. He was a good king, and his king years he was given the honorary position of having his king years calculated like the Jewish kings, not like the non-Jewish kings. So Gemara says there's two problems with that. First of all, you have a contradiction in the Psukim, because we have a clear source that Koresh had his king years calculated from Tishrei, not from Nisan. What's that source? So Gemara quotes another pasuk. This one is from Ezra, from Perek Vav, which talks about the completion of the building of the Beis HaMikdash, and it says that the Beis HaMikdash was completed on the 12th month, the month of Adar, on the 3rd of the month, in the 6th year of the king Dariyavish. And it says that exactly 1 year later, which has to be the 7th year on the 12th of the month, on the 12th month, on the 3rd of the month, so it's the 3rd of the month of Adar in the 7th year of Dariyavish. That is the year that Ezra and his people left from Bavel, and they didn't arrive in Eretz Yisrael, it says, in Yerushalayim, until the 5th month in the 7th year, and it does not say the day. So therefore, they left on Adar of the 7th year, and they arrived on Av of the 7th year. How could you leave on Adar of the 7th year and arrive in Av of the 7th year if the year changes on the first of the month of Nisan? Obviously, it didn't change on the first of the month of Nisan. It must have changed on the first of the month of Tishrei, and therefore we have a contradiction as to when the king year starts for Koresh. So the Gemara says, first of all, this is Koresh, that's Dariyavish. It's different people. How could you compare them? There's also a problem on our discussion before where we compared Koresh and Dariyavish. We'd asked the question from Dariavish's king years, and we answered Koresh was a kosher king. What does Koresh have to do with Dariyavish? And this is where the Gemara says that it's all the same. A person, Dariyavish, Koresh, Artaxerxes, three names for the same individual. Now, how do you answer the contradictory psukim, since it's all the same pasuk? Some of them seem to show his king years beginning in Tishrei, and some show his king years beginning in Nisan. The Gemara says at some point he soured. He was a good king in the beginning, and they counted his years from Nisan like the Jewish kings, and then he became a bad king to the Jews, and therefore they dropped that honor and started counting his years from Tishrei, and that was what happened later. In review, what have we learned today? We have discussed the two sources for the halacha that king years for Jewish kings begin in the month of Nisan. One is from the comparison of Shlomo HaMelech's rule to that of the departure from Mitzrayim. Both of them begin at the same time, and both are in the month of Nisan, as we've proven from Aaron's passing, which was before Moshe Rabbeinu's speech. The second source which we gave for this same halacha was from the fact that we have an extra phrase, the second, which means that the second month was also the second month of the kingship of Shlomo HaMelech. Then we discussed this difference between Jewish kings and non-Jewish kings. We brought a proof from Artaxerxes that his king years began in the beginning of the month of Tishrei, not the month of Nisan. We also gave a source that showed that his king years were counted from the month of Nisan. Sometimes we gave another source that was counted in the Tishrei. The Gemara resolved the contradiction by saying that he was a good king at some point, and therefore was honorarily considered, had his years counted as Jewish kings do from the month of Nisan, but at some point he became sour and he lost that honorary position and had his years changed to be counted from the month of Tishrei, like other kings of the nations of the
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.